All right, what's up, everybody? We are smack dab in the middle of the dog days of winter. It's cold out. There's snow covering much of the country, and people are itching to get outside, but they may not know exactly what to do. So, cabin fever setting in. That shouldn't be the case. I've got Jimmy to my right, Paul Neese, or the Neese, as we call him, across from us. And
So Neese. And connected up remotely in the great state of Montana, good friend, Dustin Butler, all-around great guy, excellent hunter of all things. I'm talking you up, Dustin, but it's all deserved. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Expert coyote caller. Now, before you try and stop me, Dustin, because I know you will, when we were getting kind of this podcast set up, Dustin had texted me, and it was very casual. He's like, killed 40 coyotes in the last 3 days. It's been pretty good. And then I'm like, well, that's pretty substantial. And I call him up. I'm like, hey, we should do this. And he's like, I don't know, man. I mean, he's like, I may not be the guy. There's a lot of up and coming guys that are, they're hitting it pretty hard right now. And I'm like, you just killed 40 coyotes in 3 days.
I think you seem like the guy.
Yeah. I think you're the guy. So anyway, before I knew you wouldn't talk yourself up, Dustin. So. But before we get too deep into this, maybe introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you have going on.
Appreciate that introduction, Mark. And a guy is entitled to get lucky once in a while, and so a lot rather be lucky than good. But no, I appreciate being included. Mark and I have been friends for a lot of years. We've shared some hunts together, everything from bears to coos deer to an occasional coyote, and it definitely is something that I don't spend as much time doing now as I did in the past, but is probably my one real true passion. If I had to give the rest of it up and pick one thing, nothing I enjoy more than hunting coyotes and calling coyotes, and so definitely something that I enjoy doing.
Well, from the sounds of it, you're not too rusty if you haven't been doing it a lot.
Now, this is one topic that we've wanted to do for a while now. It's hard to believe, actually, we're over 100 episodes and haven't discussed coyote. And I'm just going to say it right now. Everybody listening, I'm going to say coyote. It's going to come out of my mouth without thinking about it. And
are we going to start that debate?
No. Just right off the bat, I just want to say that all the way up until I was, I think, 20, maybe I was like 21, somewhere in there, early 20s, I had never heard it called coyote, ever. And then all of a sudden, all these, all you folks around here, you Western folks started coming in and hanging around talking about coyotes. And I was like, what is there, are these two different species? I wanted to know if there's a difference between a coyote and coyote. There isn't.
There's not.
But here's the thing, let's think about
actually a correct pronunciation.
I don't know. So what I recall growing up hearing was like coyote ugly, wily coyote, coyote in the Roadrunner. Put coyote in any of those phrases, coyote ugly, wily coyote, coyote in the Roadrunner. It sounds weird.
I'll say this, and I think I've heard people talk about this exact subject before, and I think actually, technically, coyote is the correct thing. I don't know. Don't quote me. But it's regional. Like everybody in Wisconsin here, coyote.
Yeah.
And then you get out, I guess predominantly west. I don't know about the east, but I feel like you hear coyote. Dustin, shed some light on this if you can.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Throw it out.
I'm sure I'll step on some toes when I say this, but those of us out west, there's probably not a lot of speech and pronunciation experts out here. I was thinking that we'd probably spend more time trying to figure out how to pronounce Wisconsin than coyote. But I like to call them and shoot them no matter what you call them. So we'll just go with that.
That's totally fair. I won't argue with you there at all. I just wanted to let the listeners know that if everybody else here is saying coyote, which is fine, and I all of a sudden start saying coyote, I just don't want
in a coyote.
I don't want to have all of a sudden the entire Vortex Nation podcast listening core jump on me.
I say just do what feels natural.
I will. So anyway.
Well, so Dustin, back to the task at hand here. But I mean, you're talking about how passionate you are about coyote hunting, and let me ask you this:
how did you get into it? Was that the first thing that you started doing, or how did you find coyote hunting? And I guess what do you like about it so much that you fell in love with it?
I grew up, in a hunting family. My dad was an avid, big game hunter. I grew up as a kid, backpack hunting for deer and elk, and grew up in Utah. Our big game seasons were pretty limited, and I have an older brother that did some calling and some trapping, and he's the one that probably really introduced me to it originally. But I kind of think back on that, and I reflect back on how many days and weekends and weeks and months I spent, on the desert, blowing a call and seeing nothing show up. And I'm not really sure what it was that got in my blood that made me just stick with it and be so persistent. I'm a little bit slow. Most people would agree with that, but, there was just something about it, just the challenge of it, I think, as much as anything, because, I was fairly successful hunting big game, and there was just something about predators and how elusive they are and how difficult they are to fool. And once I, started calling a handful of them in, I think the first one I ever really called in, I was, probably in high school, and literally shot this thing off the end of my toe, from the hip, because it ran in and just wouldn't stop. And, once you kill one, it's just kind of something that gets in your blood. And it was just kind of turned into an addiction for me of trying to figure out how to go to the desert and not come home empty handed. And it just, kind of consumed me trying to figure it out.
I get that, man. I mean, they are super crafty. I know for me personally, I killed a handful of deer before I ever killed a coyote, and I was trying fairly hard at it. I mean, they are tricky. They're smart. They're crafty. They use the terrain, the wind. They're no joke. I think a lot of people think of them as kind of like a secondary thing or an off-season thing, kind of like how we were talking about here. But to be good at it, you better be focused.
I think if you're going to be good at it, you're definitely going to put in some time. And I think everybody's looking for, the quick and easy answer. And there's really, there really isn't an easy answer. There's a lot of experience and time in the field that goes along with it. I will say this, when I was learning how to do it 25 years ago, there was very little as far as, there weren't podcasts, there weren't YouTube videos, there weren't DVDs and how-tos, it was a piece of plastic with a reed in it and just something that you wanted to try to figure out. And if you had somebody that would take you out and show you the ropes a little bit, you were pretty lucky. So, I think there's a lot of information, a lot of resources available. Of course, now it's getting, more competitive. And so it continues to evolve just like other sports do, and other game animals evolve. It's getting more challenging to find coyotes that haven't been called to or aren't a little bit call shy. So it's always changing, but it's definitely a lot of fun.
Well, and not to put too much pressure on you, but we are actually hoping that this podcast will be the answer to people's easy street to coyote success. So.
Hey, I'm here to learn too. I'm probably the not terribly experienced on it, so
hopefully we can share a few things that will help out. Like I say, there's really no substitute for going out and doing it, but there's definitely some things that I believe are golden rules that really have to be followed when you're hunting coyotes if you're going to be successful. So I'll share what I can.
Well, yeah, and actually I'd love to know what those golden rules are, and I guess maybe this question will dovetail into it. But I know when you and I first started talking about coyote hunting, and you would talk about scouting and night scouting and kind of, I guess stacking the deck in your favor. So when you knew you were going to go into a spot in the morning that there were dogs there, and in my head I was like, scouting? Like, I mean, I guess, I've seen like coyote sign in the field, and like, I assume there's some dogs around here. But if that's one of those golden rules, I think, in some ways, if you want to kill one of these darn things, you got to be able to find them. So I'd assume that's part of your plan.
Yeah, I think scouting is really a big part of it. And here's the thing, right? No matter what you're doing, there's different levels of what guys are looking to accomplish. And so, and I've compared notes with a lot of trappers and government hunters, and and they're oftentimes trying to accomplish something different than what we are. Is, my background kind of comes from, I got into competitive coyote hunting early on, and so it was about trying to find big numbers of coyotes and put up big numbers as quickly as you could, where, a government trapper, a government hunter, they might spend 2 weeks trying to kill one problem animal. And so it really is, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, there's different ways you might go about it. But, for some of the contests and that we would hunt, we would spend several days scouting for a 1 or 2 day hunt. Coyotes move. Guys can go out and see coyotes during antelope season and deer season. And then they go back in December and January and they're not there because, they've followed the food. They've followed the deer herd, the antelope herd. They're in with the cattle. They've gone somewhere else. And so, even day to day coyotes travel. They may be, 5 miles tomorrow from where they are today. And so, scouting, locating at night, howling, locating those coyotes, knowing kind of where they are. It has been a key part of what we have done. So we'll go out the night before and typically spend several hours in the dark, howling and locating coyotes in the area that we plan to call the next day. And it also makes it easier to, when you get on stand, a couple of things. Number one, that they're there. And so oftentimes you're a little more careful walking in, you're glassing a little bit harder. You're paying a little closer attention because your confidence level is higher that there are coyotes in the area. The other thing too, I think it allows you to do is if they're there, if you make a stand or 2 or 3 and they're not responding, you can start changing your strategy or mixing up some of your sound sequences, trying to find kind of that magic button. And if they're there, it's a little easier to figure out what's going on and why they're not responding than if you've just driven down the county road and said, hey, that looks like a great spot to call a coyote.
Is calling pretty much, it seems like it's pretty much the way to go if you're not, I guess what I always thought of when I thought of people going coyote hunting, I just thought it was kind of a,
spot and stock.
Yeah, or it was sort of like, I'm just going to post up over this cornfield and see if one comes out. Or, something like that. A little bit less. What you're describing sounds very similar to a lot of the other people we've had on where, like they're talking about deer hunting, with a lot of the scouting and really involved understanding how they're going to be, how they're going to be behaving. But then there is the calling aspect too. Is that kind of the only way to get them out in the open to be able to hunt them? Or do you ever, I guess, is that basically the way to do it?
Well, I think it kind of, depends. I think with any given species, there's guys prefer to do it differently, right? Some guys go out and hunt for a social outing and, they spend a few days in camp with their buddies and they hunt a little bit and it's a social outing. Other guys go solo and backpack in 8 or 10 miles and they're there until they find the deer of their dreams, right? And I don't think there's any necessarily right or wrong. I think there's a lot of guys that burn up a Saturday or 2 during the winter going out with their buddy or their kids or whatever, and they've got some stands that they go and call, and if the coyotes come in, great, and if they don't, great, and sometimes they get them and sometimes they don't. I don't think there's anything wrong with that approach. I don't think there's any wrong reason to do it. I guess, the perspective or the angle I look at it from is, when we go out, we want to bring home a truckload full, that's why we do it. It's, so maybe the approach we take is a little bit different, but, I know a lot of guys that trap, right? There's a lot of guys that trap and enjoy trapping because your trap's going to be set every single day. And you can't always be in the field calling every day. So I don't necessarily think there's any right or wrong way to do it, but, calling is definitely, I think it can be really effective for guys that want to, want to do it.
I guess
it's probably the most exciting way to do it, right? I mean,
seems like
trapping is cool. I did that as a youngster, but I think the aspect of calling, having something come in you that you enticed that's kind of exciting. That's fun to do.
That's kind of like why I brought it up too, because as I'm thinking about, was that the best way, for example, to go out and hunt coyotes, whatever. I was thinking, and probably a lot of what we'll talk about here, but is the idea of doing that, like calling to something and literally bringing it into you. I mean, it's reminiscent somewhat of turkey hunting,
right?
Which I've been out and done before. But it's also a little bit different because when you're calling in a turkey, you're trying to call in the turkey because it wants to mate, or something like that. I'm not wrong there,
essentially,
right?
yeah.
Whereas when you're calling in a coyote, you're calling in something because you want to mimic something it wants to kill.
Yes, it wants to eat you.
Yeah.
Either way, I guess, Jim, you probably need to watch your back.
Well, and I'll be honest though. I think that's where you really have a lot more options in calling coyotes, because we'll use distress sounds or prey sounds for part of the year, but we're definitely preying upon their territorial instincts and their mating instincts getting into January and February. Coyote vocalizations become much more important. They've probably heard the rabbit in distress a dozen times and it's not working so well. So depending on the time of year and when you're trying to call coyotes, your approach is going to be very different, and you are going to prey on some of those other natural instincts that they have.
Yeah. I mean, calling. I mean, like we talked about. There's a lot of different ways. I mean, heck, there's some guys that love to run dogs for coyotes, right? But calling is like it's a dynamic. It's interactive. There's not strategy. There's a heck of a lot of strategy for trapping and running dogs and everything else. But like Dustin's talking about, switching up calls or knowing which call to use when, and you just described kind of the two major categories of prey distress sounds and coyote vocalizations. Dustin, would you mind going over, I guess, some of your favorite distress sounds? And it's not always a rabbit, right?
Yeah, it's not always a rabbit, and what my experience has been is I kind of break the year down into different stages, and I try not to play all my cards on the first or second or third time out, because typically coyotes have a habitat that they live in, and when you find areas that hold coyotes, there's typically always coyotes there. It's kind of like going back to the same canyon every year to look for mule deer, because there's a big deer in that area every single year. And so you go in and you kill coyotes, within hours or days or whatever, there's typically coyotes back in the area. So early in the season, you can normally get away with just distress sounds. When I say early, no offense to guys that like to hunt them all summer long. If you're doing predator control, if you're a farmer or a rancher, killing them just out of the den or in the summertime is a really effective way to do that. But for me, I'm kind of old school. I like shooting pretty furred up coyotes when I can skin them and make a dollar on the fur. So when I say early season, I'm talking early to mid-October. And typically for the first, month or 6 weeks of season, you can get away with just distress sounds. There's a lot of young pups in the field. They haven't been called a whole lot. And you're just kind of picking the low-hanging fruit with distress sounds. Once they've heard that a few times, you might start using some different distress, right? This is no surprise to people. There's the electronic callers have really opened up a variety of distress sounds, whether it be bird sounds or deer or antelope fawns or pheasant distress. And oftentimes I'm looking for something that, is maybe a little different than what other guys are doing or what they're using, especially later in the year. But then as the year progresses along, then you're getting into more coyote vocalizations and more of the breeding sounds and really less of the distress sound. And so really throughout the course of, say October through January or February, that strategy or what's working on those coyotes is changing and kind of evolving throughout the season.
Gotcha. So of those coyote vocalizations, then, I guess, kind of which ones are you using and when? Because I know there's challenges, that there's just locator calls. There's I think there's like kind of essentially like men seeking women, women seeking men. I think there's all sorts of stuff. What can you walk us through, maybe even just how you would go about kind of a general set?
Yeah, well, I think maybe just taking a step back real quick, or talking about the dogs and the trapping. I've learned a lot of things about coyotes and coyote behavior from guys that trap or guys that run dogs. But for guys that are looking to get into coyote hunting, you really don't have to spend a ton of money. I mean, you can take your deer rifle and you can go down and buy a $15 call and you can go start hunting coyotes, and you can do it pretty effectively. So just to kind of throw that out there, you know, if we talk about hand calls or electronic, guys shouldn't feel like they got to go spend, you know, thousands of dollars to get into calling coyotes. It's actually a pretty inexpensive hobby, and that's probably why I started calling and not, you know, trapping or running dogs. Is, you know, I could afford a $5 or $6 a call, and that was about it. But as far as vocalizations, you know, for guys that have called elk, they understand the concept of, you know, you're not going to call in a satellite bull if you sound like a 400 bull. And so I try to take an approach where I want to sound friendly. I want to sound young. I want to sound submissive, but I will let those other coyotes lead out and dictate otherwise. So, you know, an interrogation howl, a friendly howl. I typically am using higher pitch female sounds. I want to sound younger. I want to sound submissive. I don't want to intimidate coyotes out of the area. If I get an old male that's all fired up and ticked off and he starts throwing challenge howls, I'll throw him back. But I typically will let the coyotes lead with the aggression. I'm typically trying to just let them know that, you know, they've got an intruder in their area, and depending on the time of year, that's enough to bring them in. Sometimes they'll come out, they'll come in just to chase an intruder out. But as a rule of thumb, I like the less aggressive, you know, more friendly, what they call interrogation howls. Pup distress is good all year long, right? In it sets off that female's protective instincts, the male's protective instincts, you know, early in the season when they've just left the den. Typically there's a lot of coyotes in pretty close vicinity. So I would say the number one coyote vocalization would be pup distress, and then, you know, stick with your less aggressive howls.
Interesting. I feel like I've seen guys use that pup distress a fair amount, or even transition to it after they, you know, maybe they call in a double or a triple, and you've got multiple dogs coming in, and you know, they get one knocked down, and then they transition straight to that distress. Is that something that you try as well?
Absolutely. And it's like I say, the pup distress really sets off a number of different reactions, I guess. And, you know, it's like the fight in the schoolyard. Nobody wants to miss it. I mean, everyone's going to come look and gather around and see who's on top of who. And that is one thing. But so definitely after a shot, the distress, the pup distress can get them to hang around and look around and see what's going on. You know, a coyote vocalization, a howl can do the same thing. You know, they'll often stop and look back and see what's going on to that. But also just as an attraction sound to get them to come in and take a look and see what's going on. Gotcha.
You know, let's say you got maybe you call a dog in and something goes wrong. Maybe they get their wind and maybe it's just over at that point. But is there anything you can do to get that, you know, coyote to stop, to give you an opportunity once maybe, you know, the wheels come off a little bit?
You know, if coyotes they're a lot like other animals. They'll tolerate a little bit of noise. They'll tolerate a little bit of movement. You know, they'll definitely stop and look. But the wind is a deal breaker. Once a coyote catches your wind, you better take a crack while you have it, because they're not going to stop. They're not going to come back. They're not going to turn around. Wind is the deal breaker, but you know, you can get away with a little bit of noise or a little bit of movement or things like that. But once they wind you, it's pretty much game over.
What do you think has a stronger nose, deer or coyotes?
Coyotes.
I'll trust Dustin.
Boom.
There we go.
That's really saying something. You know,
there's no scientific evidence or fact behind that, but I just have to assume that's how they live. That's how they survive. That's how they find food. Right. And so, you know, when you look at the nose of a predator, you know, I don't know. I'm sure somebody out there has some scientific study that shows that being wrong. So that's certainly not a proven fact. But you know, I can remember we've played with that a little bit. You know, I've heard guys talk about, oh yeah, if it's really windy, just call with the wind at your back. And I hate to tell you, we've tried that theory a few times just because the wind was blowing so hard. There was nothing else to try, and literally watched coyotes come in to 700 or 800 yards and spin in a circle and take off the other way. I mean,
No kidding.
their noses are unbelievable. You're not going to fool their nose.
That's crazy.
Well, I guess it makes sense. You don't see too many people running tracking deer. I don't know. That's
How weird would that be?
that'd be quite bizarre.
Well, yeah, now I've
Sorry, I've thrown you
very
for a loop, Joe.
strange image in my head. But I mean, even house dogs, which are distant relatives, are actually not so distant, realistically speaking, of these animals. Nose always going.
Always.
Always.
Yeah.
You look at any
Yeah.
dog, even if it's just laying there being lazy, you see that nose twitching, constant.
Yep.
Crazy.
Well, think about hounds, right? For chasing lions or bears, and a lot of times they don't have a problem following a track that's a couple of days old, right? I mean, their sense of smell is unbelievable.
Yeah, and then you think of dry ground lion dogs and that kind of thing. It's amazing what they must be able to pick up. Yeah,
I'd be curious what breed of domestic dogs are closest to the coyote.
I don't know.
I have a setter.
We'll have to
and it's
look it up.
how far removed from the coyote is some fluffy little setter. She's like the cutest dog ever, and she loves cuddling with me. She's not a killer.
We'll have to get you that whatever 23andMe dog thing that Catherine
Oh yeah,
just did
Ancestry.com.
for her dog.
mail it in.
Oh, that's right, she did. Yeah.
But I did want to circle back real quick, Dustin. So we talked about electronic calls and mouth calls or hand calls, and you can definitely get a wide variety of sounds on the electronic call. They can be nice because you're not blowing into the thing, till you're blue in the face. But I will say, maybe it's because I'm old school or I just haven't called enough, but I do really enjoy using a mouth call. I like, making the sound myself. I guess it feels like I've actually, maybe done a little bit more. But I also like the control that you get with it, of being able to increase or decrease the volume or get more urgent or get whiny with it or even soften those tones. What do you use one or the other or a mix of both, or is it just situation specific, or how are you managing, the calling tools that you're using?
I think it's a mix of both, and it really is situation specific. And honestly, I think there's kind of a level of accomplishment or pride that comes with the hand calls or the mouth blown calls. And 20 years ago, I think my wife was ready to divorce me on several occasions, because I'd spend a lot of the year working on coyote vocalizations and learning how to do, mating sounds and breeding sounds and female whimpers and trying to build those tools so that in January and February, when other guys were struggling with their rabbit call, you were still calling coyotes and killing them. And so there's kind of a sense of satisfaction of putting in the work and effort and learning how to do those things. And, and I still enjoy going out and doing that on occasion. I enjoy going out with the hand calls and doing it just to do it, right? It's kind of like the purest fly fisherman, right? There's something to the art of it, but there definitely are some advantages to the electronic calls. Some of the sounds, some of the live animal recording, some of the coyote sounds specifically that just can't be reproduced as well with a mouth blown call. That's, just the fact of the matter. Windy days, high winds, you can get the volume of the electronic caller. It's pretty tough to do with the mouth blown call. But it's really easy to slip a mouth call into your backpack and make a few stands while you're out calling deer or while you're doing other things. And so I think they both have their place. We often would do what we called combination calling, where we were using the electronic player to make, bird sounds or coyote vocals while maybe you were doing a distress on a mouth blown call. So there are actually some opportunities to put the two of them together where you can create some scenarios for a coyote that are even greater than just one or the other. You can mix them and match them. And, if you got a partner that can do coyote vocalizations and you can, do hunting barks and hunting whines back and forth, there's some things that you can do to maybe add some believability to your stand. And so you just have to kind of get creative.
Huh.
Very interesting.
One thing that we didn't actually chat about just yet, we jumped right into the actual act of, being on a stand and calling them in and whatnot. But how is there anything in particular that you look for when you're thinking about the actual spot that you're going to go and try out? And I know you said you scout at times, like the night before, but of course, usually when people go scouting, they kind of have an idea of, well, this seems like a good spot to, actually spend some time on, see if there's anything there. Is there like,
what habitat and terrain features are you looking for?
Jeff Sturgis come on, talk about deer. They like edge habitat, like wherever there's an edge of two different foliages or whatever going on. I imagine food and water are always important, but yeah.
Yeah, I think really, and I can speak for some of the country where I'm at, but I'm sure, back in the eastern part of the U.S., it's entirely different. Out west, if we were hunting the desert country, if we found cattle, we knew there was water. If we found, crows or predatory birds, or typically it was a food source. But again, at the end of the day, howling and actually getting the coyotes to vocalize with you was the best indicator, not only that they were there, but how many there were, but also kind of what they were, right? So when we're howling for coyotes and when we're scouting, we're not just listening for them to howl. We want to know kind of what they are. Is it an old male? Is it a pair?
Yeah,
is it a female? Are they pups?
I was going to ask you that earlier, Dustin. Can you feel you have a pretty good sense of reading howls coming back to you as far as what you're hearing? It sounds like you do from what you're describing right now.
You absolutely do. A big old dominant male sounds like a foghorn. It doesn't even sound sometimes like a coyote howl. They just, they're different, and females are different, and younger pups are different. And so kind of knowing who's howling back can give you some clues as to how to call them or how to hunt them as well. What sound sequences you think are going to work in that area. But as far as the perfect stand, I think, for years and years, the perfect stand was somewhere you could, drive down the county road and you could drive over to the backside of a hill and hide your vehicle, and you could walk over the hill and sit down. And, of course, you're just looking at this big, beautiful basin that's just loaded with coyotes, and you call when they come and you can see them, right? But I think that the thing that I learned a long time ago is that most predator hunters are looking for that same stand, and that's the stand that probably gets called, once a week. And so, my belief is a good stand is where there are coyotes, and the more coyotes there are, the better the opportunity is. And then you got to figure out how to get in there and call it and how to hunt them. And so, we've done everything from sitting back to back with 12 gauge shotguns in the thick brush where we knew there was a lot of coyotes in an area working into the wind, to using a decoy and putting your electronic caller 200 yards away from you out in the middle of an ag field and laying down with a white tarp over your head, to stay out of sight. And so, good stands are kind of where you make them. But the best advice I can give is if you find coyotes, if you find a lot of them, then you got to figure out a way to get in there and kill them. And I'll tell you, too, if you can find those areas that other guys aren't creative enough to hunt or aren't willing to hunt, I think your success is better.
That translates over. Sometimes the easiest spots to get to, they're probably well pressured for a reason because they're easy to get to.
Getting hit for sure.
Yeah. Hey, Dustin, back when you're doing howling and you're scouting, do you mix that up? Do you have a favorite howl that you're using when you're doing that, or is it just you're kind of reacting to what you get back as you're doing it?
So when we're scouting at night, we're typically just using like a group locator, a group interrogation howl. And I spent a lot of years, just locating with a mouth blown howler too, where you're just blowing, 2 or 3 sets of interrogation howls and then listening for, a minute or two in between. One thing that's kind of unique about coyotes as well, or a couple things, is oftentimes they don't answer the first go around. So if you jump out of your pickup truck and you turn on your locator howl and they don't answer right away, give it a couple of minutes and do it again, because sometimes it's the second or third time that they'll respond. And the other thing too is, usually once they've kind of sounded off and howled for a while, a lot of times they won't do it again. So you kind of have to listen down the valley in front of you as they start howling, and they get the next group howling, I can't tell you how many times I've driven a few miles and howled again, and then you hear nothing, but you know that they were there. And so they are a little bit funny at times. It's not every single time, but as a rule of thumb, play that locator howl or that interrogation howl, 3 or 4 or 5 times and give them a chance to answer you.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Now, you were talking a little bit about bird sounds or layering sounds over one another to, maybe paint a picture in that coyote's head or create a scenario. Is that like a bird distress sound, or is that like a magpie or something, like kind of like a scavenger type bird, or how are you using those bird sounds?
Yeah, yes and yes. There's some really good bird distress sounds, right? And like in the area where we're at, there's a lot of pheasants, there's a lot of sage grouse. Any of those type of distress sounds are pretty good. But also, if you're in an area with ravens or crows, they're typically on a kill site with coyotes, and so mixing some of that in along with your other sounds is can be beneficial.
When you're throwing calls out there, so here's a couple of the things I wonder most when I hear people discuss coyote hunting are. See me saying coyote now? I'm still.
You're catching it.
I'm not catching it. I just really
like the way it sounds.
I'm trying to be cool, because it seems like a cool thing to say. But when I hear people discuss this, they go out and they start calling. And a lot of times the next part of their story is like, so then they start running in. And I always wonder to myself, is it like, can you just like waltz out there and just kind of start calling, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, they're all running in and crazy. It's like, you feel like you're in a movie where you're getting overrun. Or how long could a stand take before you might actually see something happen? Is it like everything I have thus far that I can relate it to is to deer hunting. In deer hunting, there are many times where you're sitting there forever. You have to be really patient before something ever comes by. Do you have times where you're sitting out there where maybe you're calling and you're waiting a really long time before any action actually happens, or is it usually pretty spontaneous or instantaneous, I should say?
No, it's everything under the sun, and some of it depends on the time of year, and some of it just depends on the day. And there's days where the first half of the day, you'll hunt your guts out and not see a coyote, and then we always call it, somebody flipped to the switch, because then all of a sudden you got 2 or 3 coming to every stand. It varies, and I wish I knew what the exact reasoning for it is, but some days it seems like you just can't do anything wrong, and they're just rolling in 2 and 3 at a time. And then there's other days where you do it the exact same way, and and you never call a coyote, or you're lucky to kill one. It's just it's hunting, and some days are better than others, just like anything else.
Have you ever seen or kind of over time seen weather influence things as like kind of like an inconsistent constant factor where you're like, oh, the weather's been doing this for X number of days, or it did this yesterday, like tomorrow's going to be good, and it is?
I honestly, I'm sure there's facets of the moon and the weather and some of that I should pay, closer attention to. But to be honest with you, if I have a chance to hunt and I have time in my schedule to hunt, I'm going to go hunt.
Kind of go when you can go.
Yeah, and you go when you can go, and you make something happen. And the thing that I guess my belief is that the one thing that dictates a coyote's schedule more than anything is his belly. And if it's bitter cold and the ground is frozen and there's no food, I don't care what the temperature is, they have to hunt to survive, and they're hungry. Mm-hmm. And then you also have the kind of the mating season and the breeding season that in my mind is going to have them active for a different reason, whether they're pairing up or they're looking for a mate, or, it's actually, the breeding season. But I really believe that the coyote's belly dictates more of what he's doing than weather or wind or moon or anything else. If they're hungry, they're going to be looking for food. And I think the rest of the time you're kind of preying upon their curiosity, or, they certainly are all about a free meal, but I don't necessarily know that there's any given weather pattern that tells me it's going to be an amazing day or a terrible day.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it seems like, you hear guys talk about that like so consistently with other types of game, and like you said, I mean, people are like, oh, do you pay attention to the moon phase, or I only hunt on days like this, and like you said, Dustin, like I hunt when I can go, and if I can get out, that's the day that I'm gonna go, and that's another big advantage too. Coyote hunting is the seasons are generally long, they're liberal. Oftentimes, there's not a bag limit. I think there's a handful of states you don't even need a license. So, what you touched on earlier of, hey, you don't need a ton of gear. The cost barrier to entry is relatively low, and you can go. It's not like, you get maybe a week for certain deer hunts or just that super tight window where if you don't go, you missed it. This is pretty nice because if you got some time, you can be flexible and go.
Is that more a liberal season sort of or longer season, and usually ability to get more than just one, for example, like when you go deer hunting? Is that just because of the nature of coyotes, or I mean, do they just sort of, I can't think of the right word. They're not like invasive, or they're like too much of them, or
they're very detrimental, right? To not only to wildlife but to sheep and cattle and other animals. And so there's definitely issues that they cause with predation, and they need to be controlled. And so I think that's part of the reason that the seasons are more liberal. And some states treat them as non-game, other states treat them as more of a fur bearer, and they're I guess a little bit more conservative on how you can harvest them. But for the most part, I think everyone views them as a predator that you have to have some control over. And at one point in time, it's been some years since I pulled some of these statistics together, but at one point in time, they were the number one cause of loss for cattlemen and sheepmen.
Oh wow!
And I don't remember what the numbers were, but pretty astounding numbers as far as how much damage they were doing. And I mean, if you look at the states out west, they're spending lots and lots of money, trapping and flying and poisoning, and some states employ professional government hunters and trappers to try to keep the numbers under control, where you've got large cattle and large sheep operations.
Is a lot of that loss like during calving season? Is that when they're taking advantage of that?
I think that's the predominant time with cattle for sure. I mean, that's when the ranchers and the farmers up in our country definitely are begging for you to come out and help them.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting, the relationship that you do see there, though, because oftentimes, like you touched on earlier, you see that, you got cattle in the area, and you'll see coyotes around it.
Hanging nearby, yeah.
What do you think hunting coyotes like you have has made you a better big game hunter?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's just, more time in the field, learning how to hunt and paying attention to wind direction. And
I was going to say, even things as basic as being a lot more attentive to wind would be, that's always going to benefit you there.
Yeah.
But I think the same could be said of guys spending more time hunting whitetail deer, more time in the field calling elk, or I think just that time in the field, regardless of what you're pursuing, is going to tune you up and make you better.
Well, like we talked with Remy Warren, it's just another thing that you do. The more often you get out there, the more bushy you get.
Yeah, get more bushy, and I guess
get bushy.
You're not out there like you might be hunting coyotes, but you're gonna see deer. Maybe at a time of year that you generally don't observe them, and you're just gonna see more things, and add to your
cumulative base of knowledge.
Your cumulative base of knowledge. What about time of day? Do you have? Is there is one time of day better than another, or does that run the gamut as well?
No, I think it's a standard pat answer, right? Your mornings and your evenings, just after daylight and just before dark, I think that's your prime time with any species. I think the same is true with predators. They do a lot of their hunting at night, and so even on days where they're not active during the day, they're active at night, and so the just before just before dark and just after daylight are probably the best times all year long. But, but we call them all day. And I've called in as many coyotes at noon as I probably have at 8 in the morning. And so again, if they're hungry, they're hunting, they're on their feet. You might be calling closer to their hunting ground in the morning and then working their bedding areas in the middle of the day, right? Where they're bedded up in a canyon or they're bedded up in some sage draws or sage pockets. And so, I think that's prime time. I mean, those, I think any predator hunter is going to tell you morning and evening are the best times, but you can do it all day long and you can call them all day long.
You do got to love that morning time, which I guess this applies to all game, but just that magic window in the morning when the sun comes up a little bit and just everything game just pops. And I know whenever I've gone coyote hunting, or maybe it's just hunting in general, I guess, but man, there's just that magic hour where stuff just stands out.
I swear, when it comes to coyotes, I don't know if they ever stand out to me. I don't get it. Everybody all the time, even people that I go around with that don't hunt, they point coyote, look, there's a coyote. I'm like, where? I don't have the coyote eye.
I've been in the truck with you a couple times, Jim. We're
it's
right
a
there
struggle.
with the tree, and then he's running. He's moving.
He's literally running, and I'm still I can't see him.
Hey, Mark, will you do me a favor and hook him up with a good set of Vortex optics?
I think he knows a guy.
Yeah. I'll see if I can put in a good word.
Yeah. But they are difficult little buggers to see for me. I don't know. It's like I can point out a deer, which they're also, they should be just about as difficult to see, maybe a little bit bigger, of course, in size. But for whatever reason, I think the amount of coyotes I've actually seen in the wild is.
I think it's like anything else. I think it's just kind of training your eye and actually looking for them. I think if you're driving down the road and you're making a conscious effort to look for them, it's it's different because they are. It amazes me how well they blend in and how well they disappear even in open country.
It's true. Man. It's true. Even in the wide open. But it's just like when you're hunting deer though. Sometimes you got to spot one deer to then all of a sudden start seeing a ton more. You just get your brain then knows what
your eye learns that shape and color and texture to look for. Yeah.
Well, it's just that I can be driving down the road going 70 miles an hour in Wisconsin and be like, oh, there's a deer in the back corner of that field. But you just you kind of know, like Dustin said, you're constantly looking for them. And there's certain places
you're
where
looking in the right spots.
You're looking in the right spots. Exactly. You're automatically narrowing down where you're going to see one of these things. And then, and then you know what they're going to look like in that terrain too. It's like, Jim and I have a hunt coming up here where we're going to be going down to Arizona and, it's going to probably take a couple days for us to get our game eye going.
Yeah. That'll be a good learning curve for you there doing that.
Yeah. I saw a pretty hilarious meme one time, and it was like a side-by-side picture, and on one side of the picture, it was like a woman wearing two different purses or, I don't know, pants or shirts or something like that. And then on the other side was some extremely craggy-looking woods and hillside and all that stuff. And so then on the side with the gal wearing two different outfits, it was like guys can't see the difference between this outfit. Meanwhile, hey, check out those 5 deer over there. It's in this crag here, you can't see anything. But one of the really interesting things that I hear people who really get after these critters quite a bit though is how they come in to calls, and it's not necessarily always like they're coming in on a line. Sometimes they do this interesting sort of, they'll come in and then bow way around you and try and get in and go downwind. And how do you play around with that? Obviously wind has been brought up a number of times. Sometimes I've heard people say just specifically where they're going to be doing their set, they'll make it as impossible as they possibly can to allow a coyote to come around behind them or get downwind of them by setting obstacles up between them and that downwind area. Or what kind of things do you do, and what do you look out for?
No, that's a great question, and I think there's absolute truth to it, right? And so you will have that experience early in the year, especially with some younger coyotes, where they throw caution to the wind and they just bomb straight in, and you're having a hard time getting them stopped. They about run you over. But it's the exception to the rule, right? And so you always want to play the wind as a general rule with coyotes, and depending on how hard the wind is blowing, kind of dictates how far downwind they're going to come. But later in the season too, if they've been called before, they may come in a little slower. They may come in a little further downwind. If you're blowing vocalizations and you're playing pup distress sounds and they're not a dominant coyote, man, they may just be slinking in and sneaking in to kind of see what's going on out of curiosity. They may not come bombing in and run right in the middle of a fight, right? And so they're coming in for a variety of reasons. You know, if it's a big old male and he's mad, he's probably going to run right in your lap. But if it's a younger pup and they're not sure what's going on, they're probably going to use the contours and sneak in on you. And so, yeah, you have to pay attention. The wind is absolute number one rule. You're never going to beat a coyote's nose, but that can help you too, because you can give yourself a spot where you can see the downwind side. You should always be watching the downwind side. If you're calling with a partner, you know, it's not a bad idea to sit and watch different directions, right? Have a guy watching for the coyotes that are bombing in and another guy watching the downwind side. Sometimes we'll set up 100 or more yards apart, depending on how hard wind is blowing or what the contours look like. But you have to keep in mind too, they are a predator. They're accustomed to stalking their prey. And so they will use a little, you know, they'll use a low spot, they'll use a draw, they'll use a coulee, they'll use a brush line, and they'll sneak in and get as close as they can get before they pop up and show themselves. And also they're visual. If there's a high ridge that they can get on and they can look at you from 300 yards away and they can see where your sound is at and see what's going on, you know, they'll do that too. And so, honestly, a lot of that just comes with experience and a little bit of luck and you know, kind of learning as you go as far as, you know, where to set up and what's going to be best. I always tell guys though, rule of thumb is if a coyote's headed for the downwind and he's going to go out of sight, you better get him killed, because if they disappear into a draw or a brush line or behind trees and they're headed for the downwind, if you have a coyote in range and you can kill them and they're going to get out of sight from you, you better kill them while you can, because they will get in a low spot and they'll disappear and they'll get your wind and you'll never see them.
Yeah. Man, it is crazy the way these things act. And to be out there hunting them and having something that's stalking up on you. That's the wacky thing about it, you know? It's so unlike most other forms of hunting. I mean,
yeah, when you're using that distress sound, I mean, they're coming in for a meal.
Yeah.
Have you called in other critters just accidentally, Dustin, when you've been out there? Have you ever had a bobcat, lion, bears come in at all to distress type calls?
All of the above. I've called in a lot of bobcats intentionally and also incidentally. I've called in a handful of mountain lions, and a few years ago, my boy and I called in a sow and 2 cub grizzly bears that about ran into our lap. That was a scary experience.
That one will get your attention.
Probably more of an adrenaline rush than I ever care to have again. But yeah, you definitely. I mean, there's definitely other critters that are going to come to the call.
How old was your boy when that sow and cubs came in?
He was 9.
And then when you got home, did you tell Mama Bear about this experience?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What I'm sure she thought fondly of it.
Yeah, she did. Well, and the funny part was they had just barely opened wolf hunting up here in Montana, and you couldn't use electronic callers. You could only use mouth blowing calls. And so I had actually picked up a wolf howler and had been kind of working on it. And, you know, and I honestly, I should have known better. I spent a lot of time in grizzly country packing bear spray or packing a sidearm, and you know, the intent was just to use some vocalizations with wolves, and we I literally did 2 or 3 sequences of wolf howls and had, you know, crows just circling us, making noise, and literally within 2 minutes of nothing but wolf vocalizations, had a sow and 2 cubs come bombing out of the trees and run into about 50 yards and stand up and look at us, and it was a little bit spooky.
Ooh,
that's a lot spooky.
No, thank you.
Yeah, once is enough.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you if you'd used any of these techniques out for wolves. I've tried wolf hunting a couple times. We had brief seasons here in Wisconsin, pretty unsuccessfully. Didn't have any great luck at it. But a lot of these techniques you're talking about, I mean, that must carry over to guys that are out there trying to predator call for wolves, I would think.
I believe it would. I haven't spent, honestly, I haven't spent much time, calling wolves, and it's kind of a shame because I live where they live. And the last several years I've been, pretty consumed with work and business and some other things. But I have done a little bit of calling. I've gone out and actually done a little bit of calling, was invited to, I had some folks come up here and they were trying to film a wolf hunt. And we did call in a few wolves. I mean, it is possible, but I'm certainly no subject matter expert. But I would like to believe that a lot of the same rules and principles apply.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, by all accounts, they're pretty sharp. I mean, it probably is coyote hunting taken to a higher level, even, I would think, with with a wolf.
Maybe some differences with just like not that coyotes, can't be, running packs, I guess, but I think there is maybe a little bit more of a pack mentality. I guess that's just all speculation on my part with wolves.
I'm gonna just throw this out there, and I know it's gonna sound stupid, but what are the big differences? I was just thinking about this. I've never thought of this question before because I just always assumed, well, they're different. But what are the big differences between wolves and coyotes? I mean, wolves are a lot bigger usually.
That's probably the primary one.
That's the big difference. That's the biggest difference I'm aware of.
My limited experience, I suspect hunting them, the biggest challenge that the wolves provide is that their home range is so much larger. And there are a lot of wolves, but coyotes might live in a 4 or 5 or 6 mile area, and when you scout them and locate them, they're there tomorrow. They're going to be there in a week within reason. And that's not true with wolves. Wolves will travel 40, 50, 60 miles. And, from what I've kind of read and understood, they make pretty large loops and have a pretty large territory. So I think with the wolves, it's more a challenge of finding where they are, right now, and they'll be somewhere different tomorrow. I think that probably would be the number one difference between the two. But like I say, I'm no expert.
That is interesting, though, and that is a good point with that range. That's being so vastly different there. We've talked a lot about calling coyotes and getting them to come in and how to get them to come in. I guess eventually you got to pull the trigger.
That's fair.
What you spoke to being in super tight cover, back to back with shotguns.
Spoke about hunting rifles, bolt action rifles.
What are you bringing with? I'd say 80% of the time. What's your firearm setup looking like there?
I think there's everybody kind of has their favorite, right? I was fortunate enough to have a real good friend that was a government hunter and trapper out in Nevada for years and years, and I ran around with. And, he was a big believer in the shotgun, especially early in the year, because it was less work to stitch his coyotes, right? And so, I kind of learned from him some of the art to shotgunning, and a lot of that really is just getting them close, and then of course using the the right ammunition. And there's a bunch of companies making good coyote loads anymore.
What is a good coyote load?
Yeah.
So my personal favorite, I actually like the dead coyote from Heavy Shot. I've had really, really exceptional luck with the T-Shot.
Okay.
I know Hornady makes some stuff. I know there's some other stuff out there. I've loaded my own, $4 stuff, but the dead coyote with the T-Shot 3-inch mag, in my opinion, is pretty darn hard to beat. That's what I like myself. But I think it just whatever a guy has some luck with, they think that's the cat's meow, right? So that's probably where that comes from. As far as firearms go, again, guys can go hunt coyotes with their deer rifle, but I think then it depends on what you're doing. If you're killing coyotes to do predator control, it probably doesn't matter. If you're shooting them because you want to skin them and put up furs, then obviously caliber choice and bullet choice is important. So, I typically like 22 cal and smaller. 2250, 204 Ruger are great cartridges. Of course, there's a lot of others, 220 Swift, the 22 Creedmoor is catching on. But again, it's going to be kind of bullet choice and then also shot placement too, right? Because even with a 204 or something small, a lot of speed does fur damage. Speed ruins fur. So, you're pushing the bullet 4,100 feet a second. I don't care if it's small. If you hit them in the shoulder, you hit them in the spine, you're blowing big holes in the fur. And so it's kind of a combination. I like to shoot a little bit lighter bullet, but maybe push it, 35, 3,600. I've had, and there's a lot of, good stuff out there. A lot of different options for guys, but there's no one perfect solution. But, definitely you're going to save yourself a lot of work if you're being kinder to the fur.
Are you trying to select a bullet that's gonna not exit then? Or
not necessarily. Some of your varmint type bullets, like your Burger varmint bullets, depending on how far the coyote is, if you're shooting them straight on, it doesn't matter what you shoot them with. It's likely not going to exit. But if you're shooting them, broadside, behind the shoulder, back in the ribs, you're probably going to get an exit with just about anything. So you're really looking for something that's going to do the least amount of damage on the way out.
Okay. You talk about putting up fur, maybe for the experienced or maybe a little bit more for a person that maybe hasn't gone coyote hunting before, hasn't skinned one out and kind of gone through that process. Do you have any tips for, getting that coyote skun out and putting up that fur, or at least getting it prepped to get it to somebody so they can tan it?
Yeah.
To be honest with you, that's probably its own topic and its own discussion entirely. Certainly how to skin them. There's a lot of tutorials, stuff online, as far as how to skin the coyote, and the best way to go about it. It's actually really simple. And if you do it when they're relatively fresh, they skin pretty easy. If you wait till they're frozen hard, it's a bit more difficult. But
yeah,
my best recommendation would be find somebody in your area. Find a fur buyer or a fur guy in your area that's willing to, work with you and help you with some of that stuff. But, there's definitely a lot of information available on it. And for guys that want to get into it, it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun, and I've done everything from sell them whole on the carcass to skinning them and selling them to actually, taking it through the whole process and putting them up and, fleshing them and sewing them and washing them and stretching them and the whole 9 yards. And it is kind of fun. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, what a process.
Products. So yeah, it just kind of depends on what you're looking for, what you're into.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think you can kind of take it, a little bit as far as you want, or maybe, maybe you'll it'll lead you down that path later on. Just like, it's like, oh, I like to shoot guns. Well, now I like to reload. It's like,
Exactly.
I'm gonna go coyote hunting. I'm gonna buy a mouth call. Oh, now I learned how to mouth call with a distress sound. Well, I'm gonna learn some coyote vocals. Well, now I actually want to, put up this fur, and go through that complete process. There's definitely a lot to it that a person could, obviously get consumed by. I don't know if you know anybody like that, Dustin, but
I haven't met anyone like that.
Not a single person in this industry.
For guys that go out and shoot one and they want to, skin it and tan it and that type of thing. I don't know that there's very many taxidermists that wouldn't do that for you. If you haul it into them and say, hey, skin this thing out and get it tanned for me. I think just about any taxidermist would do that for you.
Yeah, and probably for a fairly reasonable price, too, if a guy just wanted to hide.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be too awful bad. So
it gets more expensive when you want to make it into like a hat or something.
Hat, yeah. You have somebody make a garment. I imagine that'd probably turn it up a notch.
Coyote hat would be cool.
Have you made anything cool with hides ever before, Dustin?
No, I've got my fair share of, deer and elk and other mounts, bears, things like that. But I was actually just thinking about this the other day. This is the honest truth. I don't know how many coyotes I've killed in my lifetime, and I've never so much as had one tanned. So I've sold pretty much everything I've done, and I don't even have one in my house. So there you go.
That is funny. Talking about before. The first coyote that I killed, I got tanned. I shot it with my rifle in the Snake River Breaks. I was actually hunting deer, and he kind of went slipping down this coulee and up the other side, and I shot him offhand at like $150 and threw them in my international scout and brought them back to the house. But I got that tan, man. It's one of my coolest things that I've got in my house right now. So I love it, and cool memory attached to it. And it took me a long time to finally get one. But that's the only one I've had tan.
When you get
though, was
those
that
real,
first one.
when you get those real fluffed up ones too, man, they are soft.
Oh, they're beautiful.
Oh, you
they're
get-
incredible,
yeah.
luxurious.
Oh yeah, which is funny because when people discuss coyotes, when they're up and running around, you talk about them as though they're like these scavengers, like these disgusting things, and then all of a sudden you see a tanned fur, and it's like, well, that's
yeah, you
pretty
see,
nice.
you see them this time of year when they're all full pelt and everything. They're pretty
no,
impressive
man.
looking critters.
They're a
Yeah,
cool animal, and
yeah.
they deserve a lot of respect.
Yeah.
And they're crafty, but yeah, when they're furred up like that, man, they're a sight to behold. They're neat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I've pounded you with questions for about the last hour, Dustin. So appreciate you sharing all that info.
Did we miss anything big or any questions that we should have asked that we didn't?
No, I think we touched on some of the more important topics, and there's a wealth of information available anymore for guys that are wanting to get into it or get serious about it. But and I think honestly we could talk for days and days, but hopefully we've at least given a little bit of information to help a guy out here or there. But no, I think we've covered the more important things for sure.
Well, I appreciate it, man. And did you have something, Paul?
No, I was going to say it's been very informative.
Yeah.
I appreciate listening to you, Dustin. It's neat to get your perspective on that stuff.
No, it's always good chatting, and yeah, appreciate it. And good luck out there. And I guess for heaven's sakes, leave some for the rest of us, would you?
Yeah. No, I appreciate you guys having me on. If whether anybody listens to this or not, I always enjoy catching up with you guys and appreciate our friendship. And so thanks for the opportunity to do that. And good luck on your coos hunt next week.
Awesome, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
All
Dustin.
right.
Take
Appreciate
care.
it.
All right.
Thanks,
Good
guys.
chatting.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.